Vietnam War, the Tet Offensive. Before the Tet Offensive, the Vietnam War had been escalating since the early 1960s, with U.S. forces heavily involved in supporting South Vietnam. By 1967, the U.S. had over 500,000 troops in Vietnam, yet the war seemed to be at a stalemate. The U.S. government under President Lyndon B. Johnson claimed the war was progressing well, and military reports suggested that North Vietnam was on the verge of collapse. However, North Vietnam and the Viet Cong were not close to defeat. They had been planning a major coordinated attack to shake U.S. confidence and show the South Vietnamese population that they could strike at any time, even during the most symbolic of holidays, the Tet Lunar New Year. The Tet Offensive was a large-scale military campaign launched by North Vietnam and the Viet Cong, beginning on January 30th, 1968, during the Vietnamese Lunar New Year holiday. This holiday was traditionally a time of ceasefire, so the timing of the offensive caught both U.S. and South Vietnamese forces off guard. The goal of the attack was to inspire an upswing among South Vietnam's population, weaken U.S. morale, and destabilize the South Vietnamese government, as well as force U.S. out of the war. Over 100 cities and military bases in South Vietnam were attacked simultaneously. On January 30th, 1968, the offensive began with Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese forces invading Saigon. The U.S. Embassy and key cities such as Hue, Da Nang, and Quang Tri. The most significant attack occurred on the U.S. Embassy in Saigon, where a group of Viet Cong fighters managed to breach the compound. This attack shocked the American public as it showed the vulnerability of the U.S. forces in the heart of South Vietnam's capital. The offensive also introduced intense urban combat, which had not happened yet in the war. Fighting in the city Hue lasted for several weeks, causing severe destruction. Despite initial successes, the North Vietnamese forces struggled to maintain control of the cities, and by March the U.S. and South Vietnamese forces had regained control. So here's a quick recap. The Tet Offensive began with attacks on multiple big cities. A couple days later, the U.S. Embassy in Saigon is attacked. This was very important, so we're going to watch a quick video over what it was like in that moment.
You rolling? What an incredible situation. In the heart of Saigon, the U.S. Embassy, held by the Viet Cong. We've just had a fusillade of bullets across our bow here. The MPs have all flattened on this street corner. We're about 100 yards from the embassy. Moments ago, there was a tremendous explosion within the compound of the embassy. There's machine gun fire now. No one seems to know here. A tremendous explosion in the compound. That's the fear here, that these Viet Cong infiltrators will blow the embassy before they die.
This is Waco, Roger. Can you get in the gates now? Are the gates open, and can you take a force in there and clean out that embassy like now? They're doing that at this time, sir.
So the same time that happened, the Battle of Hue started when the city of Hue was attacked. So a couple weeks later, that battle ended after couple week long struggles, and then in March, U.S. was able to regain control of the cities, but the psychological impact had already been done. So, although the offensive was ultimately a military failure for North Vietnam, it had a psychological impact. Television broadcasts and news coverage showed the destruction, the fierce battles, and the heavy casualties on both sides. The sight of the U.S. Embassy being attacked and an ongoing fighting in South Vietnam led to growing distrust and anger towards the war efforts. The American public's perception shifted from believing U.S. victory to doubts about the effectiveness of military strategy. Public support of the war began to significantly decline. In the immediate aftermath of the Tet Offensive, the U.S. and South Vietnamese forces regained control of the territories lost, but the offensive marked a turning point. Politically, the offensive damaged President Lyndon B. Johnson's administration, leading to a dramatic shift in U.S. policy. Public opinion turned against the war, and the Johnson administration faced tons of pressure to scale back military involvement. In the months following the offensive, Johnson announced he would not seek re-election because of the growing unpopularity of the war. The Tet Offensive slowly moved the U.S. out of the war using Vietnamization, a policy designed to transfer more responsibility to South Vietnamese forces. So on this graph it shows in 1968 we had the most amount of troops in Vietnam, and we slowly came out of Vietnam. While the Tet Offensive failed militarily for the North Vietnamese, with significant losses in men and equipment, it achieved its psychological objective. The offensive proved that North Vietnam could launch successful strikes deep into South Vietnam and exposed the fragility of South Vietnamese government. The war in Vietnam would continue for several more years, but the offensive marked the beginning of a slow process of de-escalation for the U.S. And here's my sources.